Oklahoma is 2 years into a drought. Climatologists say it's a drought that could stretch for 10 years, like the one that resulted in the Dust Bowl. But that kind of weather won't necessarily devastate our state the way the Dust Bowl did. That's because conservationists, extension services, and even urban dwellers are partnering to entice more farmers and ranchers to adopt practices that protect soil and conserve water.
Winds blasting 50 miles per hour or more kicked up the afternoon of October 18th. The dust storm soon picked up tons of dirt from freshly plowed fields. Dirt bone dry from 2 years of lingering drought. The dust quickly obscured the Tulsa skyline. On I-35 in Kay County, it got so thick drivers couldn't see. Poor visibility led to 12 accidents and 27 people hurt. But despite how it looked, Clay Pope, the executive director of Oklahoma's Association of Conservation Districts, says the storm wasn't a sign climate change has Oklahoma headed for another dust bowl. He says the black blizzards of the dirty 30s were born of a decade-long drought, coupled with farming practices not suited to Oklahoma's climate or soil.
When people were doing things that caused the Dust Bowl, they weren't being evil. They didn't mean to do these things. They were just taking farming methods, the methods that they knew, and applying them to the wrong place. It was basically doing farming that really was geared for land further to the east and trying to do it in a more semi-arid area in the west.
As the Dust Bowl waned, some farmers and ranchers adopted practices that caused less disruption of topsoil to protect against flooding in wet years and keep moisture in the ground longer when there's too little rain.
People switched from clean tillage to trying to do things to leave more residue on the ground, what we call conservation tillage. Then over time we moved into more minimum till, trying to use chemicals, and now the idea is to try to move more into no-till.
Jason Warren is a soil and water conservation extension specialist with Oklahoma State University. In a field near Covington, he showed us how lessons learned from the Dust Bowl protect soil and water. Last fall, the field was planted with wheat. During the spring harvest, its straw was left standing to help hold soil in place and conserve water, instead of letting the soil dry out by tilling it before planting soybeans.
It's mulching on a massive scale. The wheat straw is providing the mulch, and just like in your garden, that protects the soil from evaporative water losses. It also protects the soil from the bombardment of rainfall. Rainfall and the action of the raindrop hitting the ground is the most devastating thing on the surface of the soil. Water running off the soil surface is nothing compared to the impact of the raindrop. And so you can protect it with the mulch here, which is wheat straw primarily, and it allows it to maintain some pore space coming to the surface and nice, soft, friable characteristic.
Over the past 2 years, most of the state has seen drought as severe as in the 1930s.
We are seeing things change as far as the overall climate in Oklahoma and the rest of the world. And so that's one of the things that we're concerned about, is we make sure that we have tools that are available to help producers adapt to some of these changes, to help them deal with some of the changes that are on the horizon that we're seeing now, and also possibly mitigate what might be going on as far as trying to minimize the impact that we see on the horizon.
Does that mean our changing climate is ripe for another Dust Bowl?
We don't think so, but you can never say never.
Assistant State Climatologist Gary McManus says techniques that preserve water and topsoil have already averted one potential Dust Bowl.
The droughts we've had since the Dust Bowl, we had one similar drought in the Southern Plains after the Dust Bowl 1930s drought, and that was the 1950s drought. We didn't see the huge dust storms and the widespread devastation that we saw during the Dust Bowl, and that's because of the practices learned during the dirty 1930s.
Shannon Phillips is the Water Quality Director for the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. She says practices that reduce soil erosion and moisture loss have an environmental benefit. It lowers the amount of carbon dioxide in the air by parking some of it in the ground. Putting it there also enriches soil fertility.
We are working with farmers to find ways that they can bank that carbon in soil and reduce the amount of time and investment they have to make in making that soil fertile for growing crops.
Using crops to put CO2 in the ground is called carbon sequestration. Sarah Pope with the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts says its EcoPass program pays farmers and ranchers to adopt sequestration practices.
The practices that we're looking at in our program and that we're rewarding producers for are those that really help curb and reverse the effects of the Dust Bowl.
Things like switching marginal cropland to grassland to keep soil in place, putting buffer zones of natural vegetation between fields and water sources to filter runoff before it enters waterways, or using no-till planting techniques.
No-till is actually an equivalent of a 3 to 5 inch rain. And so, especially in times like this with a drought, you're looking at crops that are producing at a higher rate when those who are engaging in conventional till are having a hard time retaining that water.
Funding for the program comes from the sale of eco-passes. Eric Pollard started buying them for himself and for gifts after his father gave him one last Christmas.
I live in an urban community, and I'm probably a city boy as much as I don't want to admit that. And I found out about eco-pass, and it was a way for me to support some landowners out in rural Oklahoma that are taking steps to be good stewards of the land, protecting water and soil quality.
A $5 eco-pass supports conservation efforts on 1 acre of farm or ranch land. $3.50 goes directly to the farmer to pay for things like equipment and seed to care for the land. The other $1.50 pays for verification of soil and water improvement practices. The program is a way for city folks to lower their carbon footprint by helping trap CO2 in soil.
I'm someone that drives a car and heats my home, and I realize that I'm adding carbon to the atmosphere. And so eco-pass provides a really easy way that I can lessen my impact.
Which then helps increase the number of farmers and ranchers using practices proven to help protect against a future Dust Bowl.